like disease. Graph after graph, it looks like we've made improvements. Car safety, plane safety, workplace safety, pedestrian safety, death by fire, death by drowning. Almost all of them are going down. And so that was a story that I thought. I was excited by it because I knew that when people came across it, they would find it interesting. And it was, again, an intellectual challenge. How do you explain it? And I attribute it to Enlightenment ideas.
Do you encounter much resistance to this narrative from the doom and gloom people?
Oh, you bet.
Yeah.
And there are things that go wrong. There's the opioid epidemic. That's going in the wrong direction. Yeah. There are big threats. Always a possibility of nuclear war, and we've got to be really careful not to do anything stupid and to, in fact, try to walk the world back from nuclear weapons in the future and climate change. And then there's some people who just don't believe it. They say, well, what about the terrorist attack yesterday? And I have to say, well, terrorism, they're kind of jerking us around, the terrorists, by doing an eensy-weensy bit of violence that gets a huge amount of publicity. So let's not let ourselves get jerked around by terrorists and rampage shooters, not give them so much publicity, concentrate on where the deaths really are, like in car accidents, like in ordinary homicides, like in opioid deaths. Let's look at the numbers and not get fooled by the headlines. But yeah, I do get resistance.
Obviously we have a massive reaction to any mass tragedy like a mass shooting or something along those lines, but that this is a natural thing, right? Because seems so strange that it could occur. It's a natural thing to have this reaction to this horrible tragedy, but we don't have a reaction to how many thousands of people die every day because of obesity.
Obesity, exactly. Or even if we concentrate on violence, we forget about the guy who shoots his wife because he thinks she's been flirting too much, or the two guys who have a fight in a bar over who gets to use the pool table next, and one of them is lying dead on the floor. And there are far more murders of that kind than there are terrorist killings. Every day there are something like 25 of those homicides. And so it's like a Sandy Hill massacre day after day after day after day. And they don't make the headlines because they occur, bit by bit here and there.
But it's still incredibly confusing to people when someone does do something like the Vegas shooting. Like, what is this?
So I have a discussion of that just because it is such a puzzle and because it attracts so much attention. And, a lot of it is just the notoriety. These are often, not always, but they're often kind of nobodies. And their life is going down the toilet, and they're thinking, well, how can I do something that makes my life meaningful, go out in a blaze of glory? And so they think, what is in fact, I would ask you this question. Let's say you want to become, not you, you're already famous, but if I say to a typical person, what is the one thing you can do that's guaranteed to make you famous by tomorrow? And the answer is kill a bunch of innocent people. And, that's just a perverse fact about the world. And so for people where fame and meaning and mattering are more important than anything, including life itself, we've kind of given this perverse opportunity to become a somebody because we just give them wall-to-wall news coverage.
That's fascinating. Has there been an uptick in mass shootings and these sort of tragedies along with social media and more media in general?
Probably some. And they do tend to occur in cycles. There's a copycat phenomenon.
Yeah.
Until people get a little bit bored and then it kind of dies down again. So there is that. And so there is a suggested policy. I actually signed on to this from some criminologists that the news media should not publish the names or the faces of mass killers. It may be newsworthy that it happened, but the particular name of the guy, why is that newsworthy?
The problem is it gets clicks.
Yeah, it gets clicked. You're right.
I mean, there's so many articles that you see today that you look at the title of the article and it has very little to do with the actual article itself. It's just because they come up. Yeah, I mean, these salacious headlines are they're so attractive. And it seems like today, especially, you're seeing less and less people reading the Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA Times. They're struggling. And one of the ways they keep up is by giving people what they want. If it bleeds, it leads. If it's,
Yes, right.
you know, who is this crazy asshole that shot 58 people? Let's find out what's going on in his life.
So
who is his dad? Who's his brother?
Exactly, and
Yeah.
that is, and according to this movement, I mean, it's a case that's not so innocent. It's not like the kind of clickbait of you wouldn't believe what happened to 1970s actress so and so, and they
Yes.
find a picture of her in her 70s, you know, that kind of clickbait. But this is clickbait that does real harm,
Right.
and there are other, and you do have to balance it against, of course, freedom of the press. You don't want there to be, you know, governments to tell newspapers what they can publish. But there have been some precedents where the press has voluntarily imposed some standards that do, you know, nothing to abrogate freedom of the press, but that make people better off. So I'll give you an example from sports. When the TV networks adopted a policy of not filming fans that run onto the field. People stopped running onto the field because why do they do it? So they could say, you know, hi mom to and be broadcast to 300 million TV sets.
Right, of course, yeah.
Or Canada had a policy of no longer publishing the names of juvenile killers. And, you know, that was a voluntary restraint and it was socially responsible. And I think there is something to be said for not giving rampage killers the audience that they seek.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of you know, the greater good of humanity. But if you're a newspaper guy and your business is just to sell newspapers, you're a bottom line person. The whole thing is just to increase the amount of revenue that comes into your institution.
Yeah, and not go bankrupt.
Yeah, especially today, right?
But, you know, journalists, especially in mainstream forums like the major networks and CNN and the USA Today and so on, they still have a huge readership, and they do. They have to look at themselves in the mirror. They do have journalistic codes of ethics. That's kind of one of the things that distinguishes them from the fake news and the rumor mills, and that will always attract, you know, a large following. You want to be able to trust what you can read, and so they've got to, I think, balance that against raw bottom line, because if they lose their integrity, then that's not so good for the bottom line in the long run either.
Do you think that there's I wonder if there's room for new media today in terms of, I mean, we obviously have these established places like the New York Times and like the Washington Post, but I wonder if that these like well-respected, long-standing traditional venues, I wonder if that's really the right way to do it anymore. Well,
there has been, you know, simultaneous with the kind of bottom feeders and the clickbait factories, there are a lot of really good new electronic magazines.
Yes.
You know, Vox and Medium and Pacific Standard and Nautilus and Quillette and Eon and, you know, there are others. So, and a couple of decades earlier, Slate. And they're really, really good, and you often can read things that you're not going to find necessarily in the legacy papers. And they're responsible, and they have fact checkers, and they're not clickbait factories. So there is, you know, this funny almost inequality in intelligent media, where there's a lot of real crap at the bottom, but there's also room at the top for new voices.
When you look at a guy like the President of the United States who loves to use that term fake news, I mean, it's one of the weirder times ever is his attacks on the media, and it seems to be very similar to like the way he reacted to Barack Obama mocking him during that speech. It's like the media, when they criticize him and critique him, his response is to completely attack them and just say that they're useless and fake. And it's a weird time for news when it comes to that, and for journalism.
You know, I agree. It is a very disturbing phenomenon because there is a phenomenon of fake news, but fake news is not the same thing as coverage that criticizes the president.
Right. Exactly.
And it's an example of a real lack of comprehension of how democracy works. Namely, if you're the president, you can be, will be, should be criticized.
Yes.
That's how democracy works. We don't have a supreme divine leader that we consider infallible and omniscient and that we bow down in front of and anything he says goes. He's temporarily kind of a steward. He's temporarily overseeing the government. But, if he screws up, if he says something that's not true, the people have the right to criticize him. And there better be that criticism. Otherwise, we're going to get, a tyrant or a despot.
Right.
And taking any criticism and labeling it fake news, which is a real problem, fake news, is a genuinely anti-democratic impulse, and it's really disturbing.
It is disturbing. It's also disturbing his attacks on the different intelligence agencies, attacks on
law enforcement.
Yeah, it's real weird.
It's real weird.
It's real weird that if you boil it all down and you look at it like, oh, what's going on? Oh, well, anyone that's after him, anyone that's attacking him, criticizing him, like these people get demeaned, and he uses his influence and his power to kind of shut down all of these criticisms seemingly without any concern for the long-term consequences of diminishing the impact of these media.
It's a really important point.
Yeah.
And again, this is a big theme of enlightenment now, is what makes progress possible is that we have the institutions that are smarter than any of the flawed individuals that make it up. That we recognize that we humans are we're kind of smart, but we're not that smart, and we all like to think that we're good and decent and wise, but no one of us in particular is that good and decent and wise.
Right.
But we can set up rules and institutions that make the society as a whole better than any of the individuals that make it up. And democratic government is the prime example. And the difference between a democracy and a cult of personality like Mao in China, or Stalin in Russia, or Hitler in Germany, or Mugabe in Zimbabwe now, or the Kims in North Korea, is that we don't worship a supreme leader who kind of embodies the virtue of the people. That's the idea that the United States tried to get away from.
Yeah.
The idea is you got a procedure, you got some rules, you have to have someone making decisions, but you kind of rein him in, and it's not about him. It's about the whole system. And the fact that we've now got a leader who just doesn't really seem to understand that. He seems to think that it's all about him, and that if you just, I alone can solve it, trust me, let me do it, and all these rules and regulations are the deep state, the administrative state. Well, thank God for the deep state and the administrative state. It prevents some despot from foisting his crack-brained schemes on the whole population. We do need rules and bureaucrats and checks and balances, and a press that can criticize the leader.
As a psychologist, when you're looking at all this, is this a fascinating study to you, or is it terrifying?
Yeah, I guess some of each. I'd rather not be as fascinated.
Right.
Yeah, because ultimately, you really don't want human psychology to be determining the fate of the world.
Right.
You kind of want, or at least you want one product of human psychology, namely what we collectively and rationally agree upon, to be embodied in a set of rules and procedures.
Yes.
And so it's not about, that guy.
There's also a way of behaving that we deem presidential. And Barack Obama, in my opinion, embodied that better than anybody. He was very composed, like one of the most composed leaders ever in terms of like leaders of the United States. Like the way he would communicate and the way he would respond to criticism, he just had a very sort of composed, higher level of his ability to communicate. It was very clean in a way,
I agree, and it was kind of a dignity and self-restraint, and decorum and statesman. And there's a reason for it. It isn't just that it makes you feel good when you see it, but it actually is making a statement. Namely, it isn't about me.
Right.
I'm occupying this office not to prove what a big shot I am, what a genius, what a glorious, noble, divine figure I am, but I've got this big responsibility. I've got the power to kill hundreds of millions of people, or to make them better off or worse off. I take that seriously. It's not about me feeling really empowered. It's about me kind of serving the people that elected me. And that kind of self-restraint and respect for the office is a way of reaffirming that principle of democracy.
What also concerns me is that the person who's in charge this is how a lot of the rest of the country views the nation itself. And if you have a person who's measured and objective and well thought out and well spoken, and that when you would hear, especially Obama's speeches, agree with him or disagree with him, everything was very clean. Like the way maybe I use the word clean too much, but it was eloquent.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And it was smarter than most people you know. It was more articulate than most people you know. Though the way the sentences were formed were impressive in the intellectual capacity of the person that's delivering those words. And so that made us feel better about who we were as a country. We're being led by this very wise, smart person. Whether you agree with his policies or not, there's no denying that this is it's an exceptional human.
I agree. And again, I think there's a greater reason behind it, too. The United States has the most powerful military. It's the richest country. What the United States does matters to the rest of the world. And to reassure the rest of the world that we're not just a bunch of cowboys who are going to do what makes us the most powerful, but we really think about our role. We don't do rash things that could really be bad for the world. That gets conveyed symbolically in the way that a leader comports himself, or one day herself.
Well, one of the things that I think of, though, when I see this whole thing going down, and I see also this reaction to this president, like the giant women's march. You can call it the women's march all day, and it is a women's march, but it's also a march against the president. Yeah. I mean, that's a big part of what this is. It's like the idea is that he is kind of against women in their eyes, whether that's correct or not, but that this march is to sort of show solidarity that they disagree with the way things are going. And I wonder if having a guy like this in power is going to, as we were talking about before, this sort of swing effect, gonna reignite more people to be politically active and more people to recognize the things that they don't like the calling the media fake news, or like the attacks on the intelligence community, all these various things, these things that people deem to be racist, these things that people deem to be, hostile or silly that he says, and that there'll be some sort of a powerful reaction in response to that.
That is the hope.
Yeah.
It's too soon to tell because there are two possibilities, and one of them is that he's sort of shattered some norms, created a precedent that means the successors could be even worse.
Right.
Because norms can be fragile, like what you just don't do if you're president. Well, now you can do them.
Right.
That's the pessimistic view. And the optimistic view is the country will say, oh my God, look what we've been through. We tried that. We tried crazy. Let's get back to sane.
Right.
So those are the two possibilities.
One